I call to order the regular city council meeting for Monday, October 21st at 5:30 PM. This time, just out of respect for the speakers and everyone up here, I'd ask you to please silence your cell phones or put them on vibrate to help limit interruptions. Let's move on to item 1 on the agenda. That's roll call.
Blessum.
Here.
Fuller.
Here.
Janser.
Here.
Olson. Here. Pittner.
Here.
Ross.
Here.
Samuelson.
Here. Item 2, Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Moving on to item number 3, the mayor's report. Since last time I gave a full report, I've got a few more items here other than the Chamber of Commerce Board meeting, Task Force 21. We also had a meeting with area legislators, kind of in preparation for the legislative session coming up. Chamber of Commerce Military Affairs Committee also took part in the 100th train celebration out at the Port of North Dakota. It was a pretty cool event and pretty cool accomplishment, I think. Also spoke to classes at Sunnyside, John Hoven, and Bishop Ryan in the last couple weeks. Ribbon cutting at the Transit Center, a meeting with AGT Foods, attended a DRT meeting. I believe that was last week. And then the Western Dakota Energy Association annual meeting, gave them a welcome, and then Minot North ribbon cutting, a couple of one-on-ones, conference call with the Department of Commerce, and then an organizational meeting with the Western Dakota Honor Flight folks, and there'll be some news coming out of that. Pretty cool project here happening out of Minot, the Minot area for that. Also attended the open house for the Lord's Cupboard and the welcome table, and that is kept me busy for a while. So, any questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 4. It's the city manager's report. Harold.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. As always, there's the city manager memo prepared and in the packet, which includes an update from myself as well as other department heads. I'd be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Any questions for the city manager? I don't see Mark's hand raised, so.
And as always, it's the second meeting of the month, so we have a finance update from our finance director.
The floor is yours, Dave.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you. This is quick. I know we have a lot on our agenda tonight. So one of the things that we were tasked with during our budget process was to come up with a reserve fund and balance policies. So I just want to give you a quick update on where we are at with that and kind of the background and a little bit of a timeline that we anticipate here. So what we've done is we started taking a look at GFOA best practices, North Dakota Centric Code, of course, current policy and practices within the city, and then recommendations from multiple staff members on where we're going to land with the recommendation. So GFOA best practices, they have some recommendations on the appropriate level and use and replenishment of unrestricted funds, and the language is a little bit generic. That they use words like a prudent level of financial resources, and they give us some bookend guidance and where we should be. So that's the starting point where we're looking at, and they do suggest establishing minimums and maximums. Our current ordinance has a minimum but does not establish a maximum level. So this is a section from North Dakota Century Code regarding the interim fund. It sets a maximum at 75% of the prior year's or the current year's annual operating budget for the interim fund. Now, some of the language in this refers to fund balance and cash. So there's a little bit of confusion because cash and fund balance can be very different things. So you have to walk through the language of that a little bit to interpret it accurately. So that is something that we'll have to address as well in our policy as we work through it. So current city policy and practices, The current ordinance delineates a 1/12 minimum of the fund balance, 1/12 of the average expenditures. And our current practice is a 90-day or 3/12 reserve budget. And some of this ordinance is very dated. It's been around for a long time. And as things have become more and more expensive, it becomes more and more necessary to have that cushion built into it. So the real question is going to be, what's the maximum level that we should have in those policy or in those funds? And of course, they can vary a little bit from fund to fund as well. Some of these funds, we have a lot of construction projects that we have to fund in the meantime. We may have federal or state dollars that we get on a reimbursement basis. We have to be able to cash flow those projects until we get that reimbursement. So there will be some variances from fund to fund as well. So some staff recommendations that we are working on. We're looking at other cities, both in North Dakota and around the country, and what they have adopted for policies. We'll try to look at cities close to our size, and we'll come up with some recommendations, implementing some appropriate reserves, aligning them with best practices, of course, maintain compliance with all the regulations, and then looking forward to any potential issues that we may have on the horizon to make sure that we're positioned to address those long-term needs. And we'll prepare a policy that addresses these concerns. We'll bring back a recommendation for the council review. In the coming months, we're thinking this will be maybe late first quarter of next year or sometime in the first quarter is our goal. So we'll bring that back. Any questions?
Any questions? Harold?
Mr. Lakefield, just maybe for the sake of the public, I know you and I understand this and probably most of the council, but what does GFOA stand for, and why does their opinion matter as far as recommendations?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, GFOA stands for Government Finance Officers Association, and they're the body that promulgates recommendations for all government entities throughout the country. And again, it's a recommendation or guidance that they have. That is not a rule that is established that must be followed.
Mike?
Yep, thanks. Dave, thanks for doing this. Really, no questions. Just wanted to say thank you. I think this is a great start to the work that you guys will perform, and I look forward to seeing what comes of it. Thanks.
Any other questions?
Mr. Mayor, we have one last slide, and that is we do have financial reports out there. Jenna has worked diligently to getting the third quarter financial reports out. They are published on the city's website, so it's out there for review. And just a word of caution, when you review these things, these reports are a snapshot in time. So it shows things like cash balance and those things as of today's date, particularly this time of year where we're just wrapping up construction season or getting towards the tail end of construction season. There's a lot of those bills that are out there that we haven't paid yet. So we burn through cash. This is our time of year for all of that activity to happen, and we'll be catching up. The bills will be coming in, and a lot of that money is still going to go out the door before the end of the year. So,
Thank you, Dave. Moving on to action item number 5 on the agenda, that's the Planning Commission. Item 5.2, Larson addition preliminary plat. What are the wishes of the council?
I'll make a motion to approve.
We have a motion by Rob and a second by Scott. Any discussion? Any discussion? Was it, Mark, did you have anything?
No, sir.
Okay, okay. Seeing no discussion, please record your vote.
Motion passed unanimously.
Moving on to item 5.3, the public hearing 2024-8-3 text amendments to the land development ordinance. Now is the opportunity for those who wish to speak in favor of or against the text amendments.
Mayor Ross, members of the council, I wanted to provide some context to this memo as it was presented to you. This item was brought to the Planning Commission. They did recommend approval of text amendment items 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6. Item 3, they did ask staff to bring to you and ask you to look at it again and possibly provide guidance to staff. This is the ornamental lighting. Well, I guess it would be exemption. The goal was to exempt ornamental lighting from enforcement in the land development ordinance. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to review the report of the Planning Commission and see what that discussion revolved around. But if you had any questions on any of these items, I am available. So,
Are there any questions? Seeing none. Thank you. Now is an opportunity for those who wish to speak in favor of or against the text amendments to the land development ordinance. Seeing none, what are the wishes of the council?
Mr. Mayor,
Mike,
I would move approval on items 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6 as requested by the Planning Commission.
we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second by Paul. Any discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll or record your vote.
The motion passed unanimously.
So is this where we move on to item 2 and provide direction on item number 3 on the ornamental lighting? Open for discussion. Go ahead, Mike.
So, Mr. Mayor, I don't know if I'm ready for a motion exactly yet, but one of the things that I wanted to throw out to my colleagues in watching the Planning Commission meeting, one of the things that struck a chord with me, while I don't think that we've got the wrong direction here in trying to get sort of the government out of this space, one of the things that Commissioner Baumann brought up, which I think is very important, is that if we do that, we do leave the city without any recourse whatsoever related to lighting. And, you know, that in this type of lighting, I know that there are things in the land development ordinance about building and those types of lights. And so I'm sensitive to that because I think that we do leave ourselves susceptible to, you know, players that are really playing games. You know, I'm not suggesting that this case is that whatsoever. But if you've got somebody, you know, shining a spotlight directly into somebody's home repeatedly, we would like something in ordinances to allow for that. And so what I would suggest as a starting point for staff to take a look at something, we have a noise ordinance today. In my mind, there's a lot of parallels. You know, if we've got somebody who's making a real nuisance with noise, we have recourse and we have a way to enforce that, and we have something in ordinance. And so I guess I would throw that to my colleagues. That's a thought process that we could go to. I am still in support of removing the ornamental language from the land development ordinance. I think that's not where that should be. For one thing, ornamental lighting is, in my mind, more temporary most of the time and is not something that's part of actually a structure as you're building it. And so removing it from there and considering it and consider putting it in our basic code of ordinances as sort of a analog to the noise ordinance that we've got today.
Any other comments? Steph?
Mayor Ross and Alderman Blessum, Public Information Officer, I'm plugged into Dias 7. If you want to share my screen, I can share the noise ordinance that Alderman Blessum is discussing. It's found here in Article 6 of Chapter 23. Starts with 106 with legislative findings, discusses unnecessary noise, discusses definitions and general provisions, the tests for unlawful noise, the things that are taken into consideration when deciding if a noise rises to the level of being unlawful under our code. There is a table here that has decibel levels, and then it also has kind of a section here that's related to motor vehicles, and the manner of enforcement is it shall be in accordance with section 1-8 of the Minot Code of Ordinances. So, but that's for a violation of 108. It's a B misdemeanor. Up higher, 107, I believe, is a fine of $150. So just providing that information for your consideration.
Thank you, Steph. Mike?
And so just to continue, as I said, I think that this, if developed correctly, could at least give us some way of enforcing something against a bad actor. And I think that in some cases that may be necessary, just looking out into the future. At the same time, just for those that have been heavily invested in this, I'm not positive that what I'm suggesting would have changed anything that's occurred with the current situation. It's raised the question, and Commissioner Baumann did a nice job of sort of framing that and saying, well, what if? And I think that it is something we should not, just give up on because we're removing it from one part of the ordinance and not another. And so I guess that's my thought. I guess I will make a motion, Mr. Mayor, that we direct staff to prepare an ordinance in the regular code of ordinances that reflects this thought process for lighting.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Harold? Oh, Lisa, I'm sorry.
Yes, thank you. So in that, would that pertain to the entire city, or would it be strictly downtown?
I think, Mr. Mayor, if I could, my thought process on that would be is that, again, as an analog to this one does refer to anything in city limits. If we do have differences we need by zoning, that's where that table works really well. And so we could have differences, and that could be something that they would bring that says, hey, we do think the central business district should look a little different.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Harold?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, if I may, and since we're looking at and probably reviewing through this noise nuisance ordinance at the same time, I know that council received an email from a concerned citizen here a few weeks ago with regards to our noise issue, ordinance, particularly with regards to generators and some of those kinds of things. I know that I dealt with some concerns out near the YMCA a couple of years ago as well. So I guess the question is that while we're looking at patterning our light ordinance similar to the noise ordinance, is there any review of the noise ordinance you want us to do at the same time that we're looking at this ordinance?
Mr. Mayor,
Mark?
thank you. Yeah, I'm under the impression that city attorney is at least taking a look at that with respect to the generator issue that was brought up. Again, this is one of those things that's about being neighborly and considerate, and what is reasonable to do in terms of behavior and in terms of tolerance. And so it gets to be a little bit tough, but I think Harold has a point. If it doesn't hurt us to take a look at anything else in that noise ordinance that there might be an issue with.
Mr. Mayor.
Rob?
Thank you. And I guess just for my colleagues, as Mike was saying, my only concern with this is how are we going to measure what is nuisance lighting? Like with sound, we have decibel levels, right? This is a nuisance, this is too loud. How do you rate? Are we going to go by lumens? Your lights can only be so bright. We're going to tell people how bright their lights can and can't be. That would be my only question and concern with developing this on the same level as like a noise ordinance. So,
Mr. Mayor, if I could just respond to that, and I agree, Rob. I think that it's a little maybe hairier in this particular case. Although I think, to Mr. Thomas's credit, throughout this process, one of the things that he's talked about is that we maybe do need to engage some of the science that's related here. And there are some things, whether it's, the providers that are putting the lights up around town can provide some information, some feedback. We can do some of that as we do the research on putting this together in the ordinance. And so, again, what really struck me with this was not this particular situation, but one that is truly egregious that I think most of the people in the room would agree, wow, we've got a real problem here, and we've got nothing in ordinance to deal with that. And suddenly it's a fist fight because an ordinance can't even enforce anything. And so I think there's some work that would have to be done to understand what's possible in terms of putting something in the ordinance to even measure it.
Any other comments? We have a motion and a second. If there's nothing further, please record your vote.
The motion passed unanimously.
Moving on to item 5.4, under the Planning Commission, that is the future land use amendments. What are the wishes of the council?
Move approval. Second.
We have a motion by Paul, a second by Rob. Is there any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, please record your vote.
The motion passed unanimously.
Moving on to item 5.5, underneath the Planning Commission, that's the City of Minot Moose Lodge Addition Preliminary Plat. What are the wishes of the council?
Mr.
Move
Mayor,
approval.
Mark?
second.
Okay. Scott makes a motion. Mr. Janser seconds it. Any discussion? Any further discussion? Seeing none, please record your vote.
The motion passed unanimously.
Moving on to action item number 6 on the agenda, that's our consent agenda. We currently have 19 items on our consent agenda. We have been asked to pull 3 items, 6.4, 6.10, and 6.13 from the agenda for further discussion. Are there any others? Hearing none, what are the wishes of the council?
Move approval on the remaining items.
We have a
Second.
motion by Paul, second by Rob. Discussion. Discussion? Please record your vote.
Motion passed unanimously.
Moving on to the first item, I actually asked to have this pulled just for discussion and kind of update in the process of the Economic Development Plan Review Committee. And these were the names I submitted. And after careful consideration, these are the names that I've submitted, but I know, Mr. Blessam, if you want to give us an update and maybe your thoughts and kind of the direction you think the committee is going to be going.
Yeah, and Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure if there's, if you do
We should
wanna-
probably make a
Yeah,
motion.
well,
first.
yeah, sure. So I'll move approval.
We have a motion and a second.
Okay, so first of all, I'm not sure if it's possible for us, for the PIO to get this up on the screen, to get the list, if that's a possibility. I apologize for not communicating that earlier. But first of all, Mr. Mayor, thank you for the diligent work and getting it put together. I think it's a really good list. You know, you and I chatted a little bit about some of the thoughts, and I think the list is going to be very good. The one thing that I did want to mention as concern's the wrong word. I think just a question of whether we might want to go a little bit different direction. From MAC EDC, you chose Mark Lyman. Mark's fabulous, and he's going to be an important piece in this puzzle no matter what. Because Mark, I think, will be called upon to provide information to the committee in whatever capacity he's serving in. And in fact, that's kind of the question that I have, is whether he's the best representative of that organization because of that relationship. He's an employee. He is someone who, you know, depending upon how the discussion goes, and if there's, let's say, a discussion around how that contract is working and how that's working at that organization, Mark's an integral part of that. And sitting on the committee, for me, will feel a little strange in that regard. I do think it's very important that we have someone from that organization. My preference would be someone from the board. You know, so again, I think anyone that we would have there, you know, whether it's the president of the board today or someone else that would be designated, I would actually rather see that, because Mark's voice is going to be very prevalent in what we're doing.
Okay. Is it possible for me to amend my? Okay. At this time, I'd like to make an amendment and placing.
The motion move to amend Alderman Blessam's motion.
To approve, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I
Yeah,
move to
to-
approve as it
Yep.
lists. Yep.
Yeah. To remove Mark Lyman and add Beth Feldner to that group.
I would second that amendment.
Is there any discussion?
Mr. Mayor, just quickly on
Go
that,
ahead.
I appreciate that. I think that that's a great opportunity for them to still have a board member present and also to have Mark's input.
Yeah, and I agree with you too there. And I had a really good discussion with Mark on when I was whittling down the list, and he is going to be a subject matter expert on this, and I think he's going to be a great resource. But I also see I can see that tightrope walk of in putting him on that committee. Is there any further discussion? Lisa?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would agree with the amendment. However, I think it's important for everyone to understand that committees don't have any authority. Committees bring information to boards that have authority. So they might have a lot of really good discussion, but whether it's Mark or it's Beth, their vote is only for a recommendation.
Thank you for the clarification. Any further discussion? We have an amendment and a second on the floor. Please record your vote.
Motion to amend passed unanimously.
Now we go to the original motion as amended. Is there any further discussion?
So, Mr. Mayor,
Mike,
just
go
again to reiterate, a nice job on putting together a list. I think we've got a great cross-section of the city, not necessarily the exact same players that have had the discussion over time, and so that's always a good thing. We've got great representation from different organizations and different walks of life, and I think it's going to be a good committee.
Seeing no further discussion, please record your vote.
The motion passed unanimously.
Moving on to item, I think it was 6.10, wasn't it? 6.10, Storm Sewer District 121 Puppy Dog Coulee, approve plans and specifications and call for bids. What are the wishes of the council?
I'll move approval.
We have a motion by Mike. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mark. Mike, you
Yep.
were one that asked to have this
Yeah,
pulled.
so Mr. Mayor, if I could, Lance, it looks like it's coming up. What I wanted for this one was just really an update on this project. My recollection is in 2024, this was on the budget for 17 million. I think now for 25, a year later, we're looking at something like 26, and I know there's an explanation there, so I thought we'd have Lance come and tell us about that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and excuse me, Alderman Blessam. When we talked a little bit before council here, I did pull up the previous CIP and look where we had those numbers, and we were basing the CIP cost on an estimate that we had a couple years ago where we had not refreshed the final design yet. So now we're to that point. Obviously, plans are done. That's why we're approving it. We're ready for bid. As part of that process, we always do our final engineer's estimate of what we think it's going to cost. That's based on what we're seeing in the construction market for materials and supplies and equipment and other unit prices. So that's basically where we're at. Like I had mentioned to you before, the cost of box culverts around the country has gone up, especially in areas of North Dakota. We have a lot of counties that are now replacing their old timber bridges, old steel bridges with box culverts. They're more efficient than those older bridges. So that market has gone up quite a bit, and it's going to be like that for a very, very long time. So we are reflecting that in the cost that we're presenting to you here tonight. We included contingency dollars in there, which on a project of this size is always smart to do. Don't know if we'll use that much. It's a pretty big number, but it's good to have that cushion there in case we would need it. And then if you look at the total project costs that we have at about 26.8, that includes some previous costs like engineering, some right-of-way that we're acquiring right now, and then our total construction cost plus our contingency. So that's kind of our all-in estimate at this point. Mike?
So Lance, thanks for that. Is it safe to say that this is, I mean, it's not the same market as our flood projects, obviously. We're looking at different types of contractors in general terms. Do we have the same risk that we're currently running with those flood projects, that even these estimates may be short of what we actually see? Or what are your thoughts on what this will look like in terms of bid?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Blessum, this project's probably a little unique just because of how we would build this project. It's going to be a lot of crane work. The sections of these box culverts are huge. They're very heavy. And so that's going to take some of our probably smaller local contractors out of that market just because of the size of the project. And then them trying to bond a project of this size is going to be tough. So we're going to be looking for larger contractors within North Dakota or the region that can handle something like this. It's probably going to be some bridge contractors because they handle a lot of crane work, or contractors that have very large equipment that can lift these box culverts of that size. Any other questions? Scott?
So Lance, I know I've asked you this question before, and maybe the plan that is there right now, is that the best plan there is? And I think I've asked you this before. We already have an easement for that, and it runs at an angle where now we're gonna change it and turn 90s to do that. And in water flow, that seems weird to me.
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Samuelson, we had multiple alignments that we reviewed as part of this project. The difficulty with going on the existing alignment is really a few different issues. One, it's how do you construct this project, but also handle any kind of storm flow that comes at you, right? So you almost have to keep one system online and then build the other one, because even if we don't have a rain event, you still have what we would consider nuisance flows, so groundwater, people running their sprinklers even. You'll have this constant water flow, this trickle that goes through the pipe, and a contractor trying to fight that for 1,600 feet in really tight quarters is going to significantly increase your costs. They have to deal with that water. Okay, so that's one issue that really restricts that existing alignment. Probably the biggest factor that made us shy away from that is based on the survey and where those pipes are at. We're almost 100% confident that the building foundation for that strip mall is resting up alongside that pipe. And so our concern is if we start removing that pipe, that building could crack, it could come with it, it could set us up for a significant amount of risk. So to help mitigate that, to help deal with the flow issues that we have, constructability-wise and phasing, the decision was made to basically go around the other side of that strip mall and through Target's property. Cost-wise, it's a little bit more expensive to go the other direction. The bends that are in the pipes are large enough where that's not really a consideration. You can design around that with the different slopes of the pipe to take care of that head loss that you have through it. So we feel confident in that design.
So Lance, could you, so something you were talking about there just hit me wrong. So we've got a pipe that's under there that's deteriorating, that we've got a problem that's already under this foundation. Is there a part of this plan that somehow backfills that? Because if that deteriorates, that building can go down anyway, right? So we're gonna fill it with something?
That's correct. Mr. Mayor and Alderman Blessum will fill it with either a sand solution or what we call a controlled density fill, which is like a lean concrete and sand. So we'll fill both of those pipes up. There's two of them that are underneath that existing alignment. Because the whole concern that we have right now, not only about water capacity, but then if those pipes collapse and there's people or vehicles or something on top of it, the risk that the city would have with something like that. So we have to get rid of that. And that's part of the project cost, is to abandon those pipes. Any further discussion? Any further questions? Harold?
If I may, and Lance, this probably isn't for you, it's probably more for Dave, but if you feel like you want to answer it, go ahead. And that is, so we've been through this process, starting with a different council, now this one, but we have ARPA funds tied to this project. And so if you or Dave want to give an update on the timeline, the obligations with ARPA funds, and how that potentially affects this project going forward.
Yeah, Mr. City Manager and Council, we have to obligate those funds by December 31st of 2024. So we're up against the deadline now to get this out for bid and get a contractor secured.
Okay. Thank you, Lance.
You're welcome.
Seeing no further discussion, please record your vote.
The motion passes unanimously.
Moving on to item 6.13 on the consent agenda, approval of accounts receivable write-offs. What are the wishes of the council?
I'd move approval.
We have a motion by Mike, second by Paul. Mike, you asked to have this pulled.
Yeah, Dave, if you don't mind, I just wanted to say, we're in our second, I think, round of this now. I want to make sure that it's working for you guys. The one thing I noticed with this one is these were all just quick fixes. I mean, these aren't write-offs the way that we would normally think of them. And so I guess my question would be, first of all, is what we're doing right now workable? Is it making sense? To me, it's perfect. I can read it. I can know if I got a question. And then second of all, if it is a little bit of a burden, would it make sense for us to give you some additional direction that says these ones that are not meaningful, meaning they're duplicates or something along those lines, does it make sense to remove them, or is just the blanket the easier way to go?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Blessum, I think it's workable. Jenna puts it together really quickly, so she might have a different comment, but I don't think it's very intensive. I thought the same thing in particular this month. Some of them were duplicate billings, same line of thought. However, my other thought was that there's an approval process and the process that these things should go through. And so if we're having a constant having to write these off because of duplications or other things, that maybe we need to go back and take a look at that process. So I don't think it's bad that we have some of those on there, and hopefully it's maybe a deterrent to pay a little more attention to that stuff too.
Mr. Mayor, if I can continue. And the other thing, in my mind, just thinking about it from a controls perspective, it's simpler to say, look, this is the threshold, put it on. As long as there's not a huge burden to each line item that gets on there. There may be for fixing it, which is what you're getting at, but what I'm getting at more is just in presenting it to us. If it's better just to leave them all, I'm all for it, because I can certainly read through them quick enough to know if there's something I want to ask.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Blessum, I don't think that there's an issue with how it's working. There aren't very many of them that we're going through. And again, the big thing is it brings attention to it. So one thing that we look at, and two of the examples here were that there were duplicate billings. So we usually take a look to make sure that there was another billing that was out there and verify that that information is accurate. So that is something that we should be taking a look at anyway.
Any further questions of Dave? Thank you, Dave. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we have a motion and a second. Please record your vote.
The motion passed unanimously.
Moving on to item 7, action items on the agenda. Item 7.1, the revised parking ordinance, section 20-24, parking heavy vehicles regulated. What are the wishes of the council?
I'll make a motion to approve.
We have a motion by Rob. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second by Mark. Discussion. Mike.
So we've seen this once, and I sort of reserved the rest of my comments for now when we'd have that discussion again. I do feel like the 1 block or 300 feet is a little sort of extra in this process. That may be more than is what's needed. Again, I don't feel crazy strongly about it, but at the same time, I think we're putting a burden there that says, hey, go find a different neighbor that's now a full block away, and now they're going to have to call it in at that point, where in the current situation, it essentially says, put it right in front of yours, and you've got to move it every 48 hours, I believe it is. I like moving it to 24. I think that makes sense. But now we're saying move it over in front of that guy you don't even know and make him call the next time. And I think that's what we're kind of setting ourselves up for, and that feels a little funny to me.
Mr. Mayor.
Rob?
Thank you. I guess, Mike, and I hear what you're saying, but I think the reason that we talked about putting that in there last time was because you'll have the guy that'll park out in front of his house, and then in 24 hours, he'll go move his vehicle and pull it back and park it in front of his house, and he's fulfilled the obligation by doing that. And by doing this, we're just saying, hey, you can't keep doing that over and over and over every day. So,
Mr. Mayor, I think
Mike.
if I can continue, I think I agree with you. I think what we're doing with this one now is saying, move it over in front of that guy's for one night and then back to yours again the next night. So I don't know that there's a great solution here, but I do think it's relatively arbitrary and artificial.
Scott?
So, Mr. Mayor, just so I'm not confused, and maybe Mr. Joyce can correct me, but we have actually, the action that we're taking here tonight, we're eliminating the 24-hour and 48-hour rule on those, correct?
Mayor Roth, Alderman Samuelson, absolutely. So, yeah, to Alderman Blessum, what we're trying to do is opposite of what you're saying. So, just to make sure we're clear. So currently in 20-24, in the parking of heavy vehicles regulated, there's two parts of it. One of which talks about vehicles that are in excess of 8,500 pounds. So then you have like what weighs more than 8,500 pounds, right? And the other is, but part of that, it can't be parked from sunset to sunrise. So working with the police department, coordinating with the city attorney's office, we offered a number of variables, but the one that appears to be the easy, if in fact we want to move forward with some sort of restriction, the easiest to enforce would be to put all of these recreational type vehicles, trailers, into 20-24 and don't do the sunset sunrise, because then there could be some quibbling on the time of that day, but just do a hard 12 a.m. to 5 a.m. So you don't have moving. Parking anywhere from 12 a.m. to 5 a.m. would be restricted. So what it would really do is those type of vehicles, they're either parked in a driveway or they're secured, potentially in an RV storage lot or something like that during that time period, not parked in city streets.
And who would,
Again, that's a recommended option if we were to pursue such a restriction.
and who's going to be, obviously, the police department?
The
will
police
be the ones
department. So we
enforcing.
coordinated that with the police department. That time of night on most nights, according to the police department, there would be time to enforce, and the lieutenant, before they go out, look at this, this section of town, this section of town. You just kind of, we don't have enough patrol officers that we're hitting 100% of the city every night, right? But that way we could be proactive. Again, as mentioned in the memo, currently we're complaint-based only, right? So unless there's a complaint, yes, we may be looking at the heavier tractor trailers that are parked overnight, but not the lighter recreation vehicles and trailers.
So Mr. Joyce, if I did I get mixed up here? Because isn't that what did we give that as direction? Is that why I'm remembering it that way? And then did staff come back with an alternative that
Yes.
you think is better? Okay.
Alderman Blessing,
All right,
yes.
now I'm following
So
it.
what
Okay.
we were directed to do after September 3rd was to go back and look at, option 2, which in fact was a little convoluted, potentially moving it in front of somebody else's house, et cetera, right? So, and one of the issues with that is how do we even enforce it? The enforcement issue. So we believe in what we recommended if council wants to move with such a change to the ordinance, the easiest way is just cut and dry, 12 a.m. to 5 a.m., no parking of said vehicles on city streets.
Okay, and if I can continue, so then, I'm following all that now, and I think that makes sense as I get into the right level of the details here. Does this make any, excuse me, does this make any changes then to the other scenarios that we talked about where you've got a contractor who's got a trailer attached to a pickup? Are they able to park it on a street overnight?
Yes,
And-
so there is an exception written into the draft ordinance that would allow them to do that up to 10 consecutive days.
So is there any concern that I'm not parking on a street, I'm parking on an avenue? I know it says any city street, but I can see the argument coming, but I'm on
It is
I'm on
meant
an
to be,
avenue.
it is meant to be all-inclusive.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, it is meant to be all-inclusive, so if we need to reword that, I can work with the city attorney's office and
Any further, Lisa?
And just to kind of piggyback off that, if this does pass, I think it certainly needs a lot of good notification to people because several of our residents are very used to parking these rigs or whatever on the street, so we have to get that word out.
yeah. Alderman Olson, absolutely. So we'll work with PIO and, really get this out and make sure people are aware and the rationale behind it.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Any further discussion? Scott?
So I think this is maybe going a little too far. And I just say that because people are kind of used to doing this, and I know it was brought up before that we need to be neighborly. I myself have a camper that overnight I've never left it in the street. It's always been in my driveway. There's a few times during the day where it was. Or if I had some construction around my house, I found a place to put it off of the street. I don't know what the solution is, but I think this is going too far.
Any further discussion? Paul?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to echo Alderman Samuelson's comments. I think this is not everyone, and I appreciate you parking your camper in your driveway, Scott, but not everybody has that option. Not everybody has that, the ability, and some people still like to go camping. And maybe that's their only option is to park it in the street before, they come home from a weekend of camping and they can't get their camper unloaded right away and restock for the next weekend and put into storage. And now we're going to be putting in another burden on top of these people. I just don't think I can support it.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, please record your vote.
The motion fails with dissents from Blessum, Pittner, Ross, and Samuelson.
Moving on to item 7.2 on the agenda, the 6th Street Southwest and 11th Avenue Southwest traffic signal. What are the wishes of the council?
I would move approval of the staff recommendation.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion.
Mr. Mayor?
Mike.
Stefan, I don't know if you wanted to talk about this a little bit, or if, I just liked your plan, so I thought.
I do have a presentation available if you want me to run through that, or if you got any specific questions, I can answer those as well.
Well, I guess I'll start here, Mr. Mayor. One of the things that I felt strongly about with this is that as we look to the future, we know we're facing incredible costs when anything related to street lighting or to intersection light, street lights.
Traffic signals.
Yeah, there you go. So that's a major expense that's gone up so incredibly much. And so what I liked about this proposal is that the data backed it up, that a four-way stop made sense there. And the long-term plan also even heads towards a roundabout, which I think is a better solution long-term when we can use them in the right places. And so I know that there are those that have a hard time with that, and that's the direction that we need to be going. I guess I would say right now, I'm more uncomfortable at four-way stops than I am at the roundabout in town today. I think it's easier to understand, and I think that's what we would find at this one. And so that's not saying that that's now or even on the horizon, but the point is that heading down a path that has a four-way stop there, cleaning up the lane markings so that it's not two people at the same side of the four-way stop is very important. And so I was glad to see that that's what the data showed as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions of Stefan? Thank you.
Stefan, before you leave real quick, I know, and we talked about this briefly, but one of the concerns here is with it going to a four-way stop, obviously we have a lot of pedestrian traffic, students that walk to Jim Hill and the Magic City campus and those kinds of things. So what, can you talk publicly a little bit about what recommendations you would make with regards to improvements for pedestrian safety should this recommendation go through?
Thank you, City Manager. I will say stop signs, four-way stops are good solutions for when you need to control really everything. Bikes, cars, pedestrians, they do a good job of controlling that motion. There are additional things we can do on top of that. I did get a quote for, you could say, the flashing stop signs, to draw more attention to that. That came back to about 11 grand if we want to do that for all four. And then the other one as well would be to increase street lighting in the area. And that just gives kind of awareness to pedestrians there. We kind of light it up, make sure in the winter and the early morning, cars can see pedestrians.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Any further? Seeing none, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Please record your vote.
The motion passed unanimously.
Moving on to item 7.3 is a motion to reconsider land lease renewal with Laverne Mickelson. This item was requested to be put on the agenda by Alderman Fuller. A motion to reconsider needs to be done by any member of the council who voted with the majority on the question, which would be for this item, Alderman Blessum, Alderman Pittner, myself, or Alderman Samuelson. At this time, I would entertain a motion to reconsider the land lease. Second call for a motion to reconsider. Seeing none, it fails.
Yes.
Okay. Moving on to item 7.4, the MI4 Maple Diversion Alignment Consideration. What are the wishes of the council?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Mike.
I would move that we give the engineers direction to move ahead with configuration A from their proposal, which is their original proposal that they brought us.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Mike?
Okay, so this, we've had in the few months that I've been on council, we've had, different difficult items, I think, that have come before us. We've had to give authorization to tear down buildings. We've had to, make big decisions about certain types of purchases and spending the people's money. Anytime we're talking about taking land for public use, it's a very, very big deal to me. And I know it has been for everyone, going back all councils. It always is. It was important for me, and I appreciate the engineering staff and Jason and everybody that's worked hard on bringing this before us, doing the special meeting with us, going through the options, going those extra steps, because those community members that are facing this are owed that. And I appreciate that very much. And so it was important to me that we go through those processes. I'll tell you, between reading the comments that we were given and reaching out and talking directly to the people affected by this, that I feel comfortable, as hard as it is and as rotten of a process of this as it is, that this is the right path, with one very big caveat. The big caveat to that is that these property owners are made whole. This isn't just, what's the market value? We had testimony during the hearing about, whether it's SBA loans or, mortgages and things that are very much associated with this by how this came about for them. Not to mention the fact that they acted in good faith to rebuild this city after the traumatic flood that we've had. And they did that. I talked to one of the property owners at length today who's got, units down there that are providing the low-income housing we all talk about. And we're now making a decision to say, shoot, we got to tear them down. I know none of us wants to do it, but it looks like that's the right decision. And I don't want anybody to ever think that I take that lightly. This is a huge deal. And through those conversations, What I've learned is that there's a big personal component. Those of you that have been through this, I'm sure you've seen this time after time. There's very personal things that come through those processes. And I just, it was important to me to have those conversations to make sure I understood them and where the people were coming from. And what came through loud and clear to me was that they get it, they understand. They want to be part of the long-term solution for our community. Because even in the face of this, they still believe that this is the right place for them to be and they want us to prosper as a city. That's incredible to me. And so I take that, very seriously in those conversations. But as I mentioned, the big thing that came through loud and clear was that we do right by them through our negotiations with them, that we work with them to come to an agreement that makes sense and leaves them whole, not just financially, that's important, but also the way that it came to the picture in my mind is that they may walk away sad, but I hope that they don't walk away mad. If we can do that, then I think we're doing right by the people that are down there and have gone through this. And, as tough a decision as this is, we can still make the right one and have all those thoughts in mind when we do it.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mike, because I agree. We have to do our best to make those people whole. And I know this is probably a tough decision for all of us. At one time in my life, I was close to this, where I live. When the flood first happened, they showed a dike over the top of my house. I waited 2 years before we started rebuilding that house because they were putting a high water bypass in. And as I look at this, I think of when it gets down to where I live, this could happen to me if things would happen to change down in that area. And I can't imagine what it would be like. Most of the people that rebuilt after the flood almost bought their house twice. And we need to think of that and remember that when we go through this process. And it's a tough decision, but I agree with you, Mike. We need to do the best for the people down there.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Please record your vote.
Motion passed unanimously.
Moving on to item 8 on the agenda, personal appearances. Now is an opportunity for those who wish to speak to the council. Now is your time to step forward. Just out of respect for others who wish to speak, please, we ask that you keep your remarks down to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tom Warsaki, 3748 White Pine Circle. I actually was going to talk last meeting in regards to one of the motions that were made, and I wished I had then, but I am now. And I actually want to address Alderman Samuelson. When he tried to defund MADEAC, however it's pronounced, in my opinion, he was doing the exact same thing he was accusing Brecka of doing. He was using the pulpit of the city council to say that we should vote for Measure 4. And because they were against Measure 4 and put it out publicly, he was trying to defund them. So therefore, he was doing the exact same thing he was accusing her of doing. And I just want to say that I am very much in favor of the work that you guys have done, and ladies, you've done a great job. But we have to look for ways of doing it more cohesively and not use the city council as a pulpit for your own personal gain. Thank you.
Thank you. Now is an opportunity for those who wish to speak to the council to step forward. Final call. Seeing none, we'll move on to action item 9 on the agenda, miscellaneous and discussion items. Item 9.1, council direction on adopting the International Property Maintenance Code and discussion on responsible property ownership.
PIO should be bringing up the presentation. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, just want to take a few minutes to address code enforcement in general with you and kind of get your direction before we deep dive potentially into our current code and another code that's out there that Luke Telema, our building official, will talk a little bit about, the International Property Maintenance Code. Next slide, please. So Luke will talk a little bit about two codes, a little bit in detail, the housing code and the IPMC. And then just want to talk, just a quick reminder on code enforcement in the city and what we've been doing about it. Next slide, please. So just a reminder, last year in our citizen satisfaction survey, both residential maintenance, commercial maintenance, they regressed a bit from the same survey in 21. So that was one of the top issues that came out of the survey, along with taxes, along with streets, up there with public safety. So we reestablished a thing that we call the Problem Properties Unit to try to get after this proactively. Next slide, please. And obviously, so right now, it's complaint-based. We get complaints. We appreciate the support that council gave us in the 2025 budget. So we have a permanent part-time add-on to our code enforcement team. So that'll help us get after some things proactively. They've started doing that. So looking at issues that are in a proactive manner. So for example, if we get a complaint of a neighbor doing X, we'll go check it out, but also drive around the neighborhood, 2 blocks wide. You don't want one person to say, hey, I was written up for this, and the person down the street's doing the same thing and they weren't written up for it, right? So we're doing that. We're also looking at data. We collect data in many different ways. So for example, when we talked a couple weeks ago about the potential demolition of a couple properties, looking at data on how long has the water been shut off. So we're creating some nuisance heat maps, even looking at the police department data, so we can kind of, again, look for some leading indicators in portions of the city and take a proactive approach versus just reactive, and we're at the 11th hour and we're cleaning, it's all of these things have happened, but obviously neighbors probably see it happening over time. Right, it's happening over time. So we're looking for all sorts of data to take, leading indicators to take a more proactive approach. All right, next slide. And then with that, I'm going to turn it over to Luke, and he's going to spend some time just talking about the different codes and how they're implemented here in the city. Luke?
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Just like Tom said, city staff has identified some areas in the code enforcement realm that our current codes don't cover. We're looking at the current way of enforcing some of the codes that we've received complaints about are just not there. We have a housing code that was adopted, it appears around 1981. That's currently in our City of Minot Code of Ordinances in Article 5. This housing code, just as it sounds, is only enforced on houses that are occupied by not the owner. So these are non-owner occupied houses that the housing code covers. If we can, with the housing code, some people like to kind of say the housing code and building code synonymously, and that's just not the case. With the building codes are set as the minimum standard for construction, and these are the codes that City Council has currently adopted, and also the state of North Dakota has adopted these codes. And like I said, these are the minimum standards for each one of these particular areas of specialty. The International Building Code handles the commercial construction, International Residential Code for new houses, 1 and 2 family dwellings, up to 4 family dwellings. Then, of course, the rest of them are kind of described there as well. The principal purpose of these building codes is, like I said, to set a minimum standard for safety and to kind of guide people into, the minimum standards for construction. These international minimums provide a certain amount of legal protection for the state and cities that adopt these enforced codes. And then, there we go. So, and these adopted codes are all available online to view for free for anybody at iccsafe.org, and also available in the city clerk's office and my office. This is our current process here for the housing codes. Just like Tom said, we are complaint-based on these as well, but it only addresses residential type complaints, and mostly for interior safety and structural integrity of occupiable buildings. The primary intent of these housing codes are to provide minimum standards essential to making dwellings safe, sanitary, and fit for human consumption, or human habitation, by governing the condition and maintenance, the supplied utilities and facilities, and the occupancy, or how the building may be used. All right. Inside our housing code currently, we have these areas of focus. There are some gaps here, like I said, that aren't covered, that we've received complaints about, that people are interested in maybe cleaning up their neighborhoods. With the exterior requirements especially, that's kind of the area that we've received quite a few complaints about. Right now, our housing code only addresses the exterior requirements that relate to what building code requires. So there's nothing outside of what the normal building code would require there as far as what it looks like. And also doesn't address any commercial properties. So the International Property Maintenance Code would address commercial properties. It would be enforceable on all property, private property in the city of Minot. Right now, the code enforcement is enforcing the nuisance code, which is Article 22 in the City of Minot Code of Ordinances. This one is out of my wheelhouse. This does not have anything to do with building codes or anything like that. This is all visual nuisances and stuff like that. Like you can see here on the slide, the different types of nuisances that we enforce. What's included in the International Property Maintenance Code, like I said, this would be enforceable on all the buildings in the city of Minot, not just non-owner occupied residential buildings like we're currently doing. And it could kind of bring together multiple different codes and put it in one place for easier enforcement, possibly. It really kind of spells out specific responsibility for the different areas here as far as who's responsible for the structural integrity of the building and the equipment inside, and then the exterior as well. So whether it's the owner or the occupant, or sometimes it would be both of those things. So currently, the International Property Maintenance Code is not one of the state-adopted codes. The other ones from the previous slides are. Although I've talked to the building official in Fargo, and I think the letter from him was included in the agenda packet, and they seem to like it. And then I think Corbin Dickerson, our assistant city attorney, was going to speak on some of the legal hurdles that this type of code enforcement can bring.
Mayor Ross, members of council, good evening. I went to a legal conference at the end of September in Orlando, Florida. It's the International Municipal Lawyers Association annual conference. And there we talked about the International Property Maintenance Code. The presentation was titled IPMC Trouble Around the Corner. And it came relevant at the time because we were talking about this and would the city be interested in implementing this code and how we should go forward. So I just want to share some of the concerns that the presenter had at that conference and talk about some of that. So first off is IPMC, it's a template. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It literally has blanks in there where you fill in the city of Minot. For instance, with like a grass ordinance for nuisances, you fill in the number of inches. So it's not one-size-fits-all. It's a template that can be amended. It can be adopted to our needs. Another thing about it is you don't adopt it per se. What you do is you incorporate by reference. So you just cite to it. There's some copyright issues with the IPMC where we can't put it in our ordinance. We just say that we're adopting the 2024 version of IPMC, and that's in there. Then the members of the community can go online and see it there. However, our amendments that we will have, things that we're going to talk about in a minute, such as like notice requirements, will be in our ordinance. So it's clear, hey, we adopted this, but we have some amendments, and they'll be cited to that specific section of it. So some of the issues with the IPMC that have resulted in litigation is it doesn't provide adequate notice. So adequate notice, Luke as a building official can have someone vacate a property because it's a danger. There's no notice element in there right now. They can just, in IPMC as it's drafted, you can go up and tell someone to come out and vacate the property. Secondly, there's not an appellate process for that. Or for if you're going to demolish a house, there's not a notice requirement, there's not an appellate process or hearing. But that's something that we have in our code that's good that we could implement and add to IPMC if we want to do that. Next is we look at the authority granted to code official. So what the IPMC said is, shall have the authority to determine compliance with this code, to render interpretations, adopt policies, procedures in order to clarify the application of the code's provisions. So the code official has a lot of leeway and a lot of power. So that's something we need to consider as well. Do we want to have that remain with city council to interpret that, how to go forward? Do we want to have a separate committee, or what does that look like? Under the IPMC, the code official also has the ability to order the destruction of a house. Right now we have that with council and the appeals come here. I previously stated that, but the code official has that ability to do that through the IPMC. So also some of the provisions are vague. So you look at, it says a property must keep clean, safe, and sanitary condition. One of the lawsuits was, what defines that? Someone doesn't know what's clean, safe, and sanitary. What I think is that may be different than what you think, Mayor Ross. So that's something that we could look at defining. Another one is the IPMC authorizes code officials to enter houses without warrants. In North Dakota, we have to have an administrative warrant. That's unless we get consent, that's the process we follow. But IPMC allows that. So that's something else that we'd have to look at. What we currently have is it's not broken. There's issues and there's gaps, and there's kind of two ways to go. We can amend what we have to better serve our citizens, or we can look at adopting this and applying some of the good things that we have in our current code. That's all I have from that conference, but I'll stand for any questions if you have any.
Mike.
Corbin, you said something there that kind of perked my ears a little bit. Number one, how many, just simply, how many pages is this international maintenance code? Like, are we talking thousands? Is it? Yeah, so it's not tiny, right? I'm seeing Luke say.
Yes.
So, okay. So it's not outrageous. And I guess the thing that, so this wouldn't trump state law, right? So if we're talking about something related to, you know, entering a property, this isn't going to trump state law related to that. Is that right?
Alderman Blessing, that is correct.
So, because I get, you know, again, my ears are going to perk up anytime we're talking about something that in my mind removes freedom and gets us up to a scary edge. You know, in my time sitting up here, even before elected, there's been a few of those things that have perked up about, you know, can we track license plates as they move around town, and there's systems to do that. There's a lot of stuff. And so, in your sort of expert opinion on this, are there more pitfalls that can be there? Is this stuff we need to be concerned about if we implement this? You're saying what's there right now isn't broken. Is it worse implementing this and having to figure all that out?
I think that's where we're coming for, or Alderman Blessing's where we're coming for direction. We're asking, do we want to take the time and resources to research and fully go through the IPMC and see if that's better for Minot, or take what we have to identify some of our shortfalls and the good things. A lot of cities have had success with the IPMC. Another thing is that because right now we have, just for instance, International Fire Code, the ICC meets every 3 years, and they adopt these codes, International Property Maintenance Code. So it will fit in and work with and reference back and forth through the codes that we currently have. A lot of states, or cities, when they adopt it, they say that we will adopt any amendments that the state makes as well. So the presenter was from Arkansas, and they adopt the state amendments. The issue is North Dakota hasn't fully adopted it yet. So we'd have to rely on our own amendments and what we have. Right now, I don't think there's a right answer to your question, to be honest with you. We just got to see what fits best for us. What's best for Fargo may not be best for us. I will say with the IPMC, there's a lot more things that we can enforce, but you have to look at, do we have the right personnel? Do we have the full-time employees to enforce that? And that's something that I think will come to light the more we study it and go through it as well.
If I can continue. So, you know, and you know, another thing that comes to mind is, you know, the state with each legislative session goes through and approves a UCC, which is, it's not the same thing, but it's the same general idea, the Uniform Commercial Code. And one of the things that we found the last couple sessions there is that things that are happening in a New Jersey or Connecticut don't apply real well to North Dakota. And we need to watch for those things. And so I'm always going to be a little bit skeptical of taking, especially what's an international code, because here we're not just talking about New Jersey and Connecticut. We might be talking about, you know, Paris. You know, what does France think is the right way to deal with this stuff when you're talking about an international code? And I don't know how this one lays out, if it truly is that. But I guess I'll just tell my colleagues, I'm skeptical. I'm not sure that that applying everyone else's rules to what we've got going on is the right path. Now, that's not to say that studying it, having, whether it's your team along with Luke, studying it and bringing things that you find really compelling, maybe they just need to be added to ours. I mean, maybe that's the best way to go about this. And you know, Harold, I don't know if you want to comment on that. I think there's a couple approaches here. It's what's the kind of the base document, right?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, Alderman Blessman, if I can. The point here tonight is, and staff has no expectation. In fact, we recommend that the council not take any action to begin the step of adopting this evening. What we're saying here is, this is a concern that we hear often. We're not sure that our codes and ordinances give us the authority to handle a lot of the things that our citizens call and complain to us about. And this is an alternative to begin being the foundation of that conversation, right? But there's a lot of work that goes into us doing that. And it won't just be staff. I think there needs to be conversations with other citizens and property owners within our community as we go through this process. And I agree with you, just simply adopting carte blanche an international code without taking it through some process to vet it extensively and adapt it to our local needs would be foolish. And I think we need to do that. But before staff went through the process of going through that, and it's going to be a long process. I mean, this will probably take at least a year for us to go through that process and vet all of that. We didn't want to go through that process if it's already something that the council doesn't want to consider from the beginning, right? Because at the end of the day, what this is this is increased regulation, right? In essence, this is government forcing property owners of what they, to a minimum standard with regards to their property. So if that's not something the community or the council is interested in, our staff has plenty to do to stay busy for the next year without going through this process. But going back to the conversation about adopting international codes, we adopt several international codes here, but we go through a process every time to do that local vetting and that local tweaking, which we're getting ready to do now. So the International Code Council updates their codes every 3 years, which we'll be looking at in 2025. So we'll be going through this process with the electrical code, the building code, the housing code, all of those kinds of things, which gives good timing for us to have this conversation now, because if this is something the council wants staff and the community to work through, we can include it in that process and make sure all of those codes work together and intercorrelate. So it's not just, again, it's not just as simple as going and adopting and implementing the International Property Maintenance Code, because it's also, as Mr. Tilleman talked about here just a few seconds ago, it's addressed in the building code, both in the new construction and the existing building code, building codes and all those kinds of things. And we have to make sure all those work together. But that takes a lot of process. And so I directed staff to prepare this presentation to come have this initial conversation of, is this even a path we want to go down? Because if the answer to that is no, we have other things that we can divert attention to. But it is something that comes out of our community survey. It is something that particularly my office frequently gets calls on with regards to whether it's residential or commercial property. And Mr. Tillman is correct. Our current codes do not address well commercial issues and challenges. Our codes only address residential. And we have a lot of complaints and concerns expressed within our community with regards to several commercial properties throughout our community, and our ordinances just don't give us a way to intervene. Similar to what we were talking about with their light ordinance here earlier, providing more clarity. And again, this International Property Maintenance Code I felt was a good starting point for council and staff and the community to begin that conversation. So I just want to make that clear again. We're not adopting it tonight. This is a long process and a long conversation to get through, to talk through that. But the timing is good as we go start looking at those other codes here over the next 12 months, that we can add this as part of the conversation if that's something that council would like. And at the end of the day, it's to the council's discretion what that final code is that you adopt at the end, whether it's changes to electrical code, building codes, or even potential adopting the new code of the International Property Maintenance Code. But we felt this was something that would make some aspects of our code not quite so vague, or provide more clarity and those kinds of things on how we can help address the concerns that continue to come forward to staff on a regular basis with regards to this. But I completely agree, Alderman Blessum, with the concerns that you have, and I don't think staff wants to just carte blanche adopt this, because we want to make sure it's right for Minot. We want to make sure it's legally defensible, it's compliant with our state law. But at the end of the day, what we're really hoping is that it's helping us solve the problem that we're having in Minot right now, and whether or not this is the best tool to help us do that.
Mike?
A question for you, Harold. Is there I don't know, is there a 15% solution? Is there what I was kind of saying, which is let's review it, understand what it says, so if there's things that really are compelling and make sense for us, we can implement it? Or is there is there the whole hog solution here, or is there a way to glean some of that info?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Fuller, I think some of the alternatives that staff has discussed just internally is maybe we don't even adopt the entire International Property Maintenance Code, but maybe we take elements from it that we feel that are applicable to Minot and use that to implement in other sections of, say, the appropriate building codes or those kinds of things. There may be alternatives, and I think staff is willing to look at that. But again, we didn't want to put the time, the energy, and the resources into it if it's an automatic of this is increased regulation and a growing of government and invasion of private property rights, and we're just not interested in going down that avenue.
Any other questions for Corbin? Thank you, sir. Any further discussion? does that provide direction? I mean, are we at a point, do we need to make a motion to provide direction?
I'll defer to the city manager on what kind of direction you're looking for on this code.
I mean, at the end of the day, I would like some clearer direction from the council that, yes, this is something that you want staff to spend time on, especially in this 2025 year as we're looking at going through this process of updating all of our codes, because that's going to have enough work to it alone. So again, I prefer to keep the staff more efficient, but this will address some of the concerns and the issues that we hear both from our survey and on a regular basis from our citizens. So yeah, just some clear direction from the council that, yes, this is something that you'd like us to continue to research and address and use as a starting point. And then here over the next 12 months or so, we'll work with the community and the council through this process at the same time that we're working through it with all of our other code updates.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion just for, so that we can have the next part of the discussion here, that we do give staff direction to take a look through the code and determine if there are places where we can use some of that to enhance what we're already doing. And so that'll be the motion for now.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion.
Okay, so I think Harold's got this right. I think, our first thought's always got to be, are we taking away the freedoms that are inherent to being Americans? I mean, that's where we have to start with everything. Now, with that said, we've got feedback from our community saying, you need to enforce these things. This guy has this going on in his yard and nothing's being done about it, or this commercial property has this. And so I'm sensitive to that, and I think we need to continue that discussion. And I think saying nope, wait another 3 years probably isn't the right answer today. So I would reluctantly support this, but it's sort of with that thought process in mind, that whatever is brought is as it always is from your team, thoughtful and restrained for what truly is needed to give the tools that we need.
Any further discussion? Lisa?
I think it's helpful to staff to be able to have a template to look at, because sometimes if you're sitting around a table and you're trying to tweak or edit things, maybe a thought doesn't come to you. But if you're looking at a template and you're looking at a specific line, you can either say, yes, this would probably work, or no, it wouldn't. So whatever our staff has to do, I think it's labor intensive, but I think it gives them a leg up to be able to kind of delineate out what makes sense and what doesn't.
Any further discussion? Scott?
I would just say that I'll support it. I think if it's worthwhile to staff, they'll let us know.
Yeah, I will too. I think it's a good, all too often since I've served on the council and mayor, you hear of the complaints come in, but right after the complaint is our hands are tied. So I think we need to give staff, and I've always talked about responsible property ownership. It's one property with an irresponsible owner or an absent owner, is too much. So if we can do something to, help if it's a residential, help the 7 neighbors around a problem property. If we can help them out, I'm all for that. So, and once again, we're hoping to possibly make it a hybrid type of a situation. So yeah, I'll support that as well. Paul?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll support it, but again, I'll be completely honest, I don't fully understand it at this point. I'm just kind of glossing over it, just Googling it, pulling it up. We're talking about restrictions on the wattage of light bulbs in a landing and things like that. So, this thing gets into the weeds, and I don't want a building inspector to come into my house and tell me I need to put a different light bulb in my light fixture. So, again, I'm okay with staff using this as a resource to kind of cherry pick things that apply to our community, but I want to make sure we understand this before we can adopt anything.
And that light bulb issue was addressed a couple motions ago, right? No.
Let's go buy some new light bulbs when I leave here, so.
Any further discussion? We have a motion and a second on the floor. Seeing no further discussion, please record your vote.
The motion passed unanimously 6-0. Just to make note, Alderman Janser did have to leave the meeting at 6:48 PM, so he would not record a vote.
Moving on to item 10 on the agenda, our liaison reports. Let's start with Rob.
Yes, we had a library meeting this week, very good meeting, talked a little bit about budget stuff, and then we had the Ward County Planning Commission again. I believe this was like our 30th meeting in 3 months, so they're quite frequent, but it was another good meeting. We're discussing the ordinances that Ward County is planning to redo, and then there was a bunch of Rice Lake stuff the other night, so it was a good time.
Welcome to this part-time job.
Yeah.
Scott?
Ward County Planning and Zoning, and there have been several special meetings for that, and hopefully we'll get through it soon. I don't think it will be soon, but.
Paul?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Since our last liaison reports, I filled in for the designated member on the MPO board. We all had an update at our last meeting, so I won't bore you with the reiteration of that presentation. Visit Minot, no update. Renaissance Board meets this week. We have applications on that agenda. Elko Ordinance Review and Rewrite Committee postponed our meeting, but I know work continues by staff with some of the direction of our previous meetings. So,
Thank you. Mike?
So a couple things. We had a 911 committee meeting. One of the topics there was related to some additional. I'm trying to remember exactly the way to put this. Some additional mandates that come, sort of those types of strings that can be attached, whether it's to financing or to adopting different standards, and it was related to what radio systems were up in an emergency situation and sort of what those backup systems look like. And there's a big price tag attached, and it's mainly handled by the legislature. And so part of the discussion was, is this something that you don't fuss over to try to solve? You actually solve it by talking to the legislature and saying this is egregious and it's from 1958 and we need to adjust here because we're in a different world. And so that was part of the discussion there. I had a Commission on Aging meeting on Friday, but unfortunately was sick and unable to attend it. So I'll be at the next one. And then just one note as we go forward, we started up the committee tonight for the economic development review that we're going to be planning. And so we'll be looking at planning that, and just sort of a housekeeping part of that. The intent there, in my mind at least, as long as the committee agrees and we head down that path, is that any recommendations that we have that are related to a budgetary item would be ready for next year's budget. And so that kind of puts a time frame for us of the next, say, 6 months is really what we'll be looking for there. And so, I think we can move through that and do it efficiently and have really good discussion about where we should be headed going forward.
Lisa?
September 19th, I attended the MPO board meeting that Alderman Pittner was at. October 7th, attended the ribbon cutting for the city's new transit center. October 8th, attended the Service Basin Planning Council Executive Board meeting, and then right after the DCB Advisory Board meeting. On the 17th, attended the City County School and Park Liaison meeting. And coming up this week, the Service Basin Planning Council annual meeting will take place on the 23rd, I believe, at 8 a.m. And on the 24th, we have our October MPO board meeting. And then looking out just a few more weeks after that, November 7th, the Child Care Committee will be meeting again. It's been a number of months since we've met, but we have plans to get together and maybe bring some recommendations back to the council.
Thank you. Moving on to item 11 on the agenda, that's adjournment. So moved. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.